11 e tanto já. Tenho sono, mas ontem eu fiz o dia 22, foi de braço. E o dia 20 também foi de braço, só que foi muito tempo antes. Então pra não passar, tô ficando falho no meu negócio, bora fazer a perna logo aqui. Não sei fazer o negócio, não aprendi ainda, tô na sofrência do braço. Depois que eu aprender, eu vou ver o que eu faço com a perna, mas por enquanto vai ser só os agachamentos lá, pebal.
To test this theory, he removed the gland from several specimens, and pretty much instantly, this proved his theory correct. Once the gland was gone, the frogs turned white no matter what color their environment was. This is because the pituitary gland secretes what is called a melanocyte-stimulating hormone that causes the melanophores to spread their pigment and darken the skin. When it's gone, the frogs turn pale. And when this happens, the frog has become a hormonal blank slate, in a sense. Exactly what's needed in a model organism for controlled experiments. Once the frog no longer made its own pituitary hormones, the scientists could test what happened when they supplied a known dose of pituitary material from a different source. Like from a cow, or more specifically, from an ox. Some of Hogbin's students injected ox pituitary gland extract into the frog's dorsal lymph sac, and they discovered something that would change the world forever. Just a drop of ox pituitary material caused female frogs to eject hundreds of unfertilized eggs into the water within a few hours. Clawed frogs normally never release eggs without male frogs nearby. Okay, that's weird and a little gross and definitely interesting, but why is it such a big deal? It's because of another substance that contains similar hormones: pregnant women's pee. The researchers quickly realized that if they put women's pee into this frog, it could test whether or not the women were pregnant based on whether the frogs released their stash of ova. The reason this works is because of the hormone called human chorionic gonadotropin, or HCG, which you might have heard about before. It's present in a woman's pee only when she's pregnant. HCG wasn't a new concept to these researchers. It had already been discovered in the 1920s, and scientists at that time used this hormone to develop
Caralho, essa é muito lenta essa voz, né? Você espera essa
the
porra,
mouse
mas
test and the rabbit test.
pra ser rápido é muito
Inject
fácil.
urine into an immature female mouse or rabbit, then dissect the animal a few days later. If the urine came from a pregnant woman, the animal's ovaries would be enlarged. But this was both problematic and time-consuming. For these tests to work, a woman's urine had to be injected twice a day for 3 days into the mice or rabbits. Then the rabbit would have to be killed, and scientists would examine it, which was sometimes inconclusive. But this frog test changed the entire putting human pee inside of animals game. It required just one injection, and the results could be seen in less than a day. The results were less objective, and the frogs didn't have to be killed, which is of course more humane, and meant that they could be used again and again. Plus, the frogs were easier and cheaper to maintain than rodents. In 1938, the Xenopus pregnancy test was published, and it was around 98% accurate. And so, in that one moment, frog futures skyrocketed, and the species rapidly became a global laboratory commodity. Beginning in the late 1930s, South African suppliers collected huge numbers of wild frogs and shipped them abroad to research institutions and diagnostic laboratories. From London to New York, and eventually South America, the Middle East, Asia, and Australia. By the 1950s, Xenopus was one of the most widely kept laboratory amphibians in the world. The pregnancy tests empowered women with better information and were the beginning of an era of better reproductive health care. But their usefulness was soon obsolete. By the 1960s, the pee on a stick test was invented. It uses the same concept as the frog test, but without the frog. The strip contains antibodies that bind to the same HCG hormone, and if present, these antibodies form visible colored lines in the test and control regions as the urine moves up the strip. So the frogs were no longer needed for pregnancy tests. Laboratories were actually struggling to get rid of them. But overall, moving away from the frog test was great for the frogs, great for humanity, great stuff all around. Except for one thing. There was something sinister hiding alongside the African clawed frogs that scientists didn't account for when they shipped them around the world. Something that we didn't even realize was there until 1998. The first signs of it appeared in Australia, in the upland rainforests
Olha a Austrália, velho,
in the
tomar no
late
cu.
1970s. While doing amphibian population surveys, scientists came across something shocking. Streams full of hundreds of dead southern day frogs and southern gastric brooding frogs. Gastric brooding frogs were
Ah, dói aqui, velho. Dói nesse aqui.
E eu percebi agora ali que eu tinha o plano de fazer aqui, né? Eu comprei isso aqui e foi mais pra fazer da barriga aqui, que é pendurar de fazer, né? Mas eu esqueci disso e tô fazendo... Eu tenho que fazer aqui pra testar. O povo diz que cresce no descanso, né, velho? Não quero ficar parado 3 minutos não, que é um doente.
In the mid-1980s, more sharp declines struck frogs in the Yungala rainforests, wiping out the northern gastric brooding frog and nearly eliminating the Yungala day frog. By the late 1980s, far northern Queensland rainforests saw widespread losses of at least 7 species. 4 vanished
E a
entirely
peste do
from the
Cane
wild,
Toad,
while
velho, do
3
Brasil, que
survived
leva pra
in
Austrália
human
também, na merda lá.
at least 14 frog species
lugar
in this area of
fudido.
Australia have been affected, with either total extinction or dramatic losses. The die-off seemed to roll northward like a wave. The pace was shocking, spreading at roughly 100 kilometers per year, and the crashes often happened within just a few months. This pattern seemed to be consistent with the spread of a highly infectious disease. A 1994 study began to investigate this possibility. Scientists collected frogs from the area and kept them in 2 separate tanks, one filled with rainwater and one filled with water from the streams. Those living in rainwater lived for a long time. Those living in the stream-fed tanks died quickly. The pathogen was spreading through the stream water. But scientists were still not sure what the pathogen was and why it was devastating this local population of frogs. Then, in 1996, herpetologists in Panama, an entire world away, noticed something shocking. Streams full of dead and dying frogs in the upland rainforest. And just like in Australia, there were many species affected and no evidence of environmental causes. Could this be the same pathogen? The scientists in Panama and Australia sent their dead frogs off to be studied together. Of the many possibilities, researchers believed a fungal infection could be the culprit. So they did skin scrapings and microscopy to look for possible fungal structures in the frog's skin. And indeed, they found fungal reproductive structures in the skin of the dead or dying frogs' fingers and backs. They also scraped some off to see if it would reinfect and kill new frogs. It did. They identified this skin disease as cutaneous chytridiomycosis. In 1999, the fungus itself would be identified as Batrachochytrium dendrobatitis, or BD. BD is an aquatic fungus. I genuinely didn't even know that that was a thing. These are rarer than terrestrial fungi, and most of the aquatic fungi that do exist feed on algae or decaying matter, not living vertebrates. But BD is obligately parasitic on amphibian skin. This is the only place where it can complete its life cycle. It produces motile zoospores that swim in the water using a single flagellum to search for an amphibian host. Once a zoospore contacts the skin of a susceptible amphibian, it encysts and develops into a sporangium within the epidermal layers. The sporangium grows, matures, and produces new zoospores internally. When fully developed, these zoospores are released onto the skin surface and into the surrounding environment, ready to infect new hosts. In this microscope image, you can see the zoospores about to burst out. And BD on the skin of frogs is devastating for them. It affects both their respiration and ability to balance water levels. As the infection worsens, the frog's skin thickens and peels, disrupting water, electrolyte, and oxygen exchange, quickly weakening and often killing the animal. BD grows best in cool, wet environments and is sensitive to high heat and desiccation. This is why scientists kept finding it in the upland rainforests.
Mas fazer com só.
And things don't tend to
Porque é
dry
meio
out.
possível, né?
As scientists searched
Eu não
for the
tenho
vector,
equilíbrio
the
suficiente
disease
pra fazer
spread
isso.
worldwide, across the Americas,
Eu não
Europe,
consigo nem chegar na
Asia,
perna
and
reta
beyond,
em
causing
pé,
massive
porque já lá
declines in
baixando.
over 700 amphibian species and at least 90 extinctions.
meu
BD
tornozelo.
is one of the most lethal pathogens known, spreading easily through water and through contact,
Deve ser até que assim,
even
ó.
without a host. It infects hundreds of amphibian
Isso,
species,
Bíblia, é louco.
including salamanders, some symptomless carriers. hours. While the fungus isn't a zombie fungus, I can't help but think of the fungal infection from The Last of Us, growing from their skin, spreading aggressively all over the world. Except it's worse than
Cacete,
that. Imagine
difícil.
if a disease like this infected nearly every mammal.
Você pena que eu fiz, esse aqui não fiz não, né?
Dog, cat,
Aí
mouse,
fazia de um lado e não
cow,
fazia do outro assim, porque você quer simultâneo os dois, né? Vai mostrar o desequilíbrio que tem no seu corpo. Um lado é mais desenvolvido, um lado não tem equilíbrio. E vai lhe indicar a margem que você tem que treinar. E tá limitando. Você tem que focar tal parte.
I knew about this devastating fungus. I knew it was obliterating frog populations the world over. I didn't know where the fungus originated. I didn't know until I started
porra.
researching this
Isso aqui
video.
vai assim
And
com força, mas isso
scientists
aqui...
didn't know for a long time either. But by now, you've probably put the pieces together. In 2004, scientists started to as well. They wanted to find out the origin of BD once and for all. So they began testing museum specimens of frogs from before, during, and after.
Caralho, essa perna não tem força pra se levantar. Inacreditável. Esse aqui consegue, esse aqui não consegue.
And what they found was that BD started to proliferate in the 1930s. It originated
Tem um modo
in
mais fácil
Africa,
também, né? Que é
and it
o...
was found to be prevalent on the African clawed frog. The African clawed frog
Lado
likely
só,
acted
um
as
lanche,
the
não
primary
lanche.
vector, carrying
Só vai
BD
assim,
from
abaixa aqui
Africa
assim.
to other continents. It went unnoticed for so long because the African clawed frog itself is essentially immune to this fungus. Because BD is thought to have originated in Africa, the African clawed frog evolved alongside it over millennia, developing natural tolerance. It mounts a more effective immune response and produces antimicrobial peptides in its skin that inhibit fungal growth. But the fungus can still be harbored on its skin. So when any African clawed frogs escaped or were intentionally released into the wild from labs all over the world, they brought with them one of the most pathogenic fungi the world has ever seen. The road to hell is indeed paved with good intentions. Hogbin, the scientist who invented this frog pregnancy test, believed science should serve society, not just elite interests. He was committed to practical applications of biology and improving public health and medical diagnostics. He wanted better reproductive health care for women. He wanted a better world. There are many ecological disasters where it's easy to point at the moral failure of the people involved, but this was just a genuine, giant accident, one that for some species, the consequences are irreversible. Now that we understand what this fungal infection is, scientists are working tirelessly to try to reverse its spread, though the work necessary is immense. Unfortunately, BD is probably not going anywhere, and once it spreads to a new environment, it pretty much becomes a permanent part of that ecosystem. So scientists have some creative ideas for frogs to live alongside it. One approach is direct treatment for infected amphibians, like with antifungal medications. A study in 2022 examined whether antifungal and probiotic treatments could help endangered mountain yellow-legged frogs survive outbreaks of BD. Antifungal baths
12 ele vai ser insidioso, né, velho? Não sei se eu não. Vamos levantar 12 no total. Agora você não tá fazendo muito de certo não, mas vou pesquisar. Tenho que pedir então esse treinamento da perna que tá uma bosta. Eu tenho que treinar o do hábito também, né? Vou tentar o da barca que eu falei.
Than they would by chance, and their infections cleared up at a much higher rate than the control group. It will be challenging to deploy enough greenhouses the world over to make a difference, but the materials are cheap and it does seem to work. And perhaps most significantly, scientists are also studying natural genetic resistance in frog populations that have survived BD outbreaks. By identifying genes, immune responses, or skin microbiome characteristics linked to BD resistance, researchers hope to uncover mechanisms mechanisms of natural adaptation to the pathogen. These insights could then inform conservation efforts, such as selective breeding or reintroduction programs that use resistant individuals to rebuild populations. These combined efforts do offer a glimmer of hope. In the past, scientific advancement for the sake of humanity has inadvertently led to some devastating outcomes for the environment. But science is also the only way forward. Humans create problems, but they also solve them. And right now, the frogs of the world need our unwavering dedication to solving this one. And solving the Chytrid crisis won't just involve trekking through rivers deep within rainforests. It will rely on problem solving at every level. Biologists modeling disease spread, chemists designing antifungal compounds, data scientists tracking populations in real time. It's a reminder that saving species doesn't just take
É que foi tipo isso, só que eu não sei direito.
scientific understanding.
Eu vou,
That is why I use Brilliant.
eu vou testando, eu vou aprendendo assim um pouco. E aí quando eu ver o certo agora eu vou conseguir entender melhor, né?
You think the way scientists do, through interactive lessons that make you see the connections between biology, math, and ecology. If you want to understand how complex problems like this one are
Ui,
solved,
pegou
Brilliant
fraco da
is the
perna
right
agora.
place to start. Brilliant's data courses, like the Exploring Data Visually or Regression and Classification courses, are
Sometimes I like just to stay on the top of the first dune, looking at people's reaction. People arrive and
What's the worst fire type?
The first time that I came here, I was around 12 years old. It was shocking. It was a feeling like to be in another planet. It looks like a desert. But Les Maranhenses gets more rain than Scotland or London, which is around 1,600 millimeters a year. So it's not a desert, it's something else.
Lençóis Maranhenses, on the northeast coast of
Lençóis
Brazil,
Maranhenses.
sits at the intersection of three biomes, a
É
rare
aqui.
overlap that supercharges biodiversity. Here, a field of dunes spreads across 350 square miles, and every year these mountains of sand migrate up to 80 feet. Then, during the rainy season, thousands of lagoons appear, many big enough to swim in. So what makes this surreal environment possible? And why, even after 2 million years in existence, does it still feel so mysterious?
Lençóis Maranhenses is the biggest field of dunes in South America.
between these dunes during the rainy season,
Fui no Ceará,
water
não fui no Maranhão não,
level
velho.
rises and they form lagoons.
You can never see Lençóis Maranhenses twice because everything is changing all the time. Strong movements of sand and water changing the shapes and the composition of the lagoons. I spent almost like a year camping and living in tents around the park and surveying amphibians and reptiles. This opportunity changed my view of life and helped to forge the biologist that I am today.
Some visitors arrive there and wonder why the water just doesn't sink.
Underneath the field of dunes, there is a rock which traps water so it doesn't keep sinking forever.
So
Traduzir os
let's
caras pro
imagine
inglês,
there
velho.
is a bathtub. When it rains, the water level starts to rise.
And then you can see the water in the holes in between the dunes, so you can see the lagoons formed.
And then in the dry season, the water evaporates, the water level starts to go down again until it gets here. The water is still there. People cannot see it, but it's still there.
Se esse ano a lagoa for em um local, no próximo ano a gente já sabe que a lagoa não vai ser mais ali. Porque aonde a lagoa chega, a duna é terra, aquela
Vamos
lagoa,
traduziram.
e ela já vai surgir mais na frente.
Tô
um pouquinho.
soltando mulher em português.
Here, an unusually large tide range creates a wide beach at low tide. Strong winds lift the fine sand and blow it inland to build new dune ridges.
The
Bora pro stream de
winds
Fade,
come
né?
mainly from the same direction. The sand gets dry and then they can be carried by these strong winds. They measure the size of the grains. It's so
Como é que essa
little.
porra desse lunge, velho?
The sand is so soft, so loose that it flows down the hill like water. It's beautiful.
The wind is constantly redrawing paths, so locals follow wind and ridge lines, not maps.
Nasci e me criei aqui na Ponta do Mangue. Meus pais nasceram aqui, meus avós nasceram aqui e a gente vive aqui todo o tempo. Às vezes a gente vai de manhã, tá ventando, a duna tá reta. Quando a gente volta à tarde, se movimenta, a duna tá de outra forma. Tem que ter bastante atenção, porque às vezes se perde. Do nada venta e apaga todo o rastro de cá. Do nada ela cria uma duna no meio da outra. Tem uma semana, do nada a gente pegou a duna errada e fomos embora. Mas na frente a gente percebeu que a gente não tá no caminho correto. Voltando de novo numa atrás do caminho para poder vir. Chama de deserto que respira por causa das dunas, né? O movimento das dunas.
Everything is destroyed and rebuilt
Seria
every
muito
single
pouco, né,
year.
não?
In the
Foda-se.
region of lençóis, everything is mixed. There are some animals that perish just
Esse daqui de Cipídio é muito fudido, velho. Braço quicando, ó, porra.
Different from almost all the others that exist in the world. That usually occur very close to the beach because it needs this salt.
We have a turtle, which is Pininga, water-tiled turtle. So it's an endemic species, and the park plays an important role for its conservation because it doesn't exist anywhere else. And this animal is known to rest digging underneath the dunes, so it reduces its metabolism waiting for the next rainy season.
The fish have a life cycle shorter than 1 year. They leave the eggs that are resistant to this dryness, and when the water comes, everything comes to life again.
We are going to a world of extremes. Lençóis, it's a micro laboratory. As we increase our knowledge, we might find ideas that might be useful from the perspective of climatic emergency.
Como não mora próximo das dunas, com o tempo a gente tem que mudar. Teu pai morava no meio daquelas dunas, ó. A duna vem crescendo, vai aumentando, vai aumentando. Aqui pra gente mesmo, daqui uns 3, 4 anos, a gente tem que sair daqui. Porque a duna vai chegando perto e vai jogando areia. Quando as lagoas secam, a gente pega os peixinhos daquelas lagoas que estão secando e coloca onde tem mais água. Pra eles ficarem sobrevivendo. Porque senão eles vão morrer de seco.
Mas é aleijado, mas não consegue ficar segurado no bagulho. Assim fica de boa. Só que quando eu vou pra cá, dá merda.
When I close my eyes and I think about Lençóis Maranhenses, the first thing that comes to my mind is a dragonfly flying over a lagoon. There are white flowers.
Uma vagabunda.
They are roots dancing in the water. It's a place that can really change people's mind and soul and heart. And they say, for the first time in breathing, very special is master.
When I passed away, I liked it to burn me and put my ashes moving from lakes to lakes, moving with the wind, with the water, to be part of it forever.
Hi, we want to hear your feedback. Every year, PBS Digital Studios sends out an audience survey, which we use to help understand what you enjoy on YouTube and what you would want to see us make more of. You also get to vote on new show ideas, so it would be great if Untold Earth fans were well represented in the polls. There's a link in the description. Thanks in advance.
Da barra é assim mesmo. Agora o do pull up, o do lunge, eu tenho que ficar em pé. Então eu tenho que dar um passo e a minha abaixar. Fudido demais de fazer, cara.
Type Pokemon? Seems like it should be a pretty simple question, but I have a feeling that if I don't want people to show up with pitchforks outside my apartment, I need to set something straight. First and foremost, I'm only talking about these Pokemon in the official competitive format and how good they are, or more specifically, how bad they are. I'm not talking about design, I'm not talking about a moral value. I'm only talking about how easy it is to win with them in the official competitive format. So if your favorite Pokemon's on this list, I'm not saying it's bad. I like a lot of the Pokemon on this list. Okay, I feel bad putting them here, but I have to. Okay, this is my mission. This is what I was put on this earth to do, to rank bad fire-type Pokemon. Those of you who've been following this channel for a while may be familiar with the fact that I recently finished doing the best Pokemon of every type series. I thought this could be a fun little counterpart to that series since we're done with all 18 types. This is a bit harder though because, like, while I could talk about tournament results when it came to good Pokemon, almost all the Pokemon on this list have no tournament results. So instead I'm talking about their potential and more specifically what holds them back and what makes them, well, not good Pokemon, competitively speaking, okay? In order for this video to actually be interesting, I'll only be talking about Pokemon in their final form. Obviously, like, there's lots of unevolved fire-type Pokemon that aren't viable, but that would not be a very interesting video to tell you, oh yeah, Larvesta, it's hard to win with Larvesta, right? Anyway, with all that being said, fire is actually a pretty good type. So much so that I actually struggled to find 10 Pokemon to put on this list. We'll be starting from the least bad and working our way up to the single worst fire type Pokemon. So if your favorite's on this list, you better hope that it's in the bottom half. And I have a feeling that a lot of you are going to like the number 10 Pokemon on our list, Houndoom. I think Houndoom is an incredible design. I feel like I should preface by saying this. I actually like Houndoom a lot. I think it's a really iconic and really memorable Pokemon from Johto, and it even has a Mega Evolution, which is actually the main reason why Houndoom is so low on this list, why it's number 10 and not, higher up. Because Mega Houndoom is actually quite good. Houndoom's typing is Fire and Dark, which is pretty good, as it turns out. But because it was introduced in Dark, which is pretty good, as it turns out. But because it was introduced in Johto, it doesn't have very good stats. What I mean by that is basically as the generations go on, Pokemon tend to get stronger and stronger, and so if we look back at Pokemon from the early generations now, they tend to struggle a bit compared to like newer additions to the franchise. Okay, so Houndoom doesn't have great stats, but I mean, let's be honest, there are plenty of Pokemon who are good that don't have very good stats, so it's not like the stats alone make the Pokemon. But the stats aren't the only thing holding Houndoom back. Its abilities are not super good, and by not super good, I mean actually pretty, they're not terrible, but they're not good. It has Early Bird, Flash Fire, and a Nerve. Early Bird means you wake up earlier if you're put to sleep, but Houndoom has bad, like, survivability, so you can just knock it out, you don't need to put it to sleep. Flash Fire is a useful ability, but it's mostly useful because, like, it gives you an immunity to a type. Houndoom already resisted fire, and also isn't bulky enough to really stay on the field for long enough that an extra immunity is that helpful. And then a Nerve is actually quite a useful ability, but it's better on Pokemon that either have insane damage output so that they can turn off, type resist berries, stuff like that, or it's useful in Pokemon that are going to be really bulky and stick around. Houndoom is neither. So actually in this case, all the abilities are kind of lackluster because the stats are bad. The main redeeming quality of Houndoom is Mega Houndoom, who actually has a very good ability, which is Solar Power. Solar Power gives the user a huge damage boost if Strong Sunlight is active, which is a really good ability. Mega Houndoom is also a good Mega Evolution, not in the sense that it's good compared to the other Megas, but in the sense that it doesn't waste any stat points. All Mega Evolutions get 100 bonus stat points total when they Mega Evolve, and none of Houndooms are wasted. It's actually a very efficient use of the stat points, where it gets a fair bit of power, a decent bit of speed, and then a good amount in its defenses, making it actually respectably bulky is the wrong word, but it won't go down to like every attack anymore. I think the main thing that held Mega Houndoom back as a Mega Evolution was the fact that in order to bring out its full power, you really want the sunlight to be active, and the best way of setting the sun up is with a Pokemon who does it naturally via the ability Drought. But the problem is that the best Drought setter for a lot of the time that Mega Houndoom was around was Mega Charizard, and you can't Mega Evolve 2 Pokemon on your team. So Mega Houndoom doesn't really have any results, but it also wasn't the single worst Pokemon of all time, but if you wanted to use it, it would be a bit difficult. With Mega Evolution returning to Legends ZA, I think there's a small chance that Mega Houndoom could be good again, but it's not super likely because, again, it is one of the worst fire types of all time. Okay, coming in at number 9 is a bit of a weird pick. It's Magmortar. I think I say that funny. There was a video I made where I talked about Magmortar a lot, and I got a lot of comments saying that I said it weird, but I feel like I'm saying it the way that it's spelled, so I don't know. What's weird about Magmortar is the fact that Magmar, its pre-evolution, is actually quite good. The reason why Magmar is good is because it can hold the special item that can only be held by Pokemon who have not fully evolved yet, called the Eviolite, which increases their bulk by a considerable amount. And this item is so good, in fact, that it effectively makes Magmar tankier than Magmortar, even if you factor in giving Magmortar a different item, like Leftovers or Citrus Berry to recover HP. And the reason why Magmar and Magmortar care so much about their defenses is because of the fact that they get access to one of the best moves in the official competitive format, called Follow Me. Follow Me is a move that many of you are probably familiar with. It was used on the infamous Pachirisu that won the World Championships in 2014. It basically forces the opponent to target the user instead of the user's partner. And in the double battle format that we played, that's quite strong, as it turns out. But because you're basically using your Follow Me user as a punching bag, staying alive is actually pretty important. The more attacks you tank, the more you can protect your teammates. And this is the main reason to use Magmar or Magmortar instead of another fire-type Pokemon. And basically, it's not like Magmortar is a terrible Pokemon, which is part of the reason it's not higher up on this list. The problem is that Magmar and Magmortar, like, their best role is to be used as this like, defensive punching bag, but Magmar does it better. And every single time Magmortar's around, Magmar is also legal, because you can't get Magmortar without Magmar. The other thing is that Magmortar actually gets slower when it evolves, which isn't the biggest deal, and it doesn't get that much slower, but there are times where the speed actually matters, especially on a supporting Pokemon. Sometimes Magmar is going to want to click Overheat or Flamethrower. Sometimes even Will-O-Wisp is used as a supporting option, and so, like, while the speed doesn't matter when you're using Follow Me or
Puto, vou fazer uma porra de um exercício, você tem que fazer o bagulho certo ainda, vai uma desgraça.
I'm set up to be a special attacking sweeper because it actually has a good special attack stat, but because it's like kind of in the middle when it comes to speed, it's not so easy to use it outside of Trick Room because it's relatively slow, but it's also fast enough that it doesn't work that well inside of Trick Room, in addition to not being all that strong. Basically, because Magmortar doesn't have a strong role to fill of its own, and because it's kind of just worse than Magmar in the best role that it has, it's a little bit irrelevant most of the time. I do like Magmortar, I think the design is awesome, but I think the best thing that Magmortar did was give Magmar the ability to use the Eviolite. Now, my plan at the moment is to do a series for the worst Pokemon of every single type. And if you want to make sure that you don't miss future uploads, make sure you subscribe. YouTube's algorithm can be a little finicky, and so sometimes you might want to watch a video from a creator, or at least want to be notified that it exists. And if you don't subscribe, it's less likely that you'll be shown that. It also helps the channel out when you subscribe, so if you want to support myself or the over 30 people who work on this channel, it's like, it doesn't cost anything and it helps us out a lot. I also want to say thanks to everyone who has subscribed. I really don't take it for granted. And I really appreciate everyone watching this video as well. Like, you all have limited time, and I appreciate that you spend some of it with me and my videos. Anyway, coming in at number 7, people are going to be angry about this one, but I need you to wait a second before you start typing an angry comment, okay? Number 7 is Darmanitan. And the reason why I think people are going to be mad about this is because in the single battle format, Darmanitan is actually quite good. I think Darmanitan has been one of the best Pokemon before. However, I'm talking only about the official competitive format, and so in this format, Darmanitan has effectively 0 results in its base form. Darmanitan also has a Galarian version, which is a type Pokemon and like transforms or Phasmo or can transform and changes types. We're not talking about that here. I'm talking strictly about the Unovan Darmanitan. I think that Darmanitan is one of the coolest Pokemon from a design perspective because Darmanitan has 2 abilities. The first is Sheer Force. Sheer Force is just a good ability. It makes
desgraça, né?
a very good ability. Okay? The second
Mas
ability is called Zen
foi isso aí.
It's a unique ability.
Ele perde a desgraça, velho. Tem que fazer só o braço mesmo.
Competitive format.